Very warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Rae Street. Rae, you're on mute as well. Now you're not. Good. Rae comes to us with quite a pedigree, which includes Greenham and Vice President of CND. So she's here really to talk about the peace movement in 2022, but obviously in the context of her many activities in the peace movement. Rae, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. I guess when we think of a stance against war, weapons and militarism at the moment, we immediately think of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I first would like to say that I utterly condemn what Russia is doing in the Ukraine. I mean, it's barbaric. However, it has to be recognized that NATO has played a part in where we are today. After the fall of the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union was promised that NATO would not expand, but it did. Why? Because, among other reasons, in the USA, a committee to expand NATO was established. The president of this body was Bruce Jackson, whose main job was as strategic director of Lockheed Martin, then, and probably now, the biggest arms manufacturer in the world. When a state became a new member of NATO, it had to throw out the old Soviet military hardware and buy from the West, mainly the USA, for interoperability. So NATO did expand, first with states from Central Europe and then from Eastern Europe. It was a bonanza for the arms manufacturers, and still is. So NATO expanded right up to Russia's borders, and not only that, conducted military exercises along that border. To go back to the current conflict in Europe, what's the best way forward to stop suffering and destruction? My thoughts are that we need to press for ceasefire and negotiation. However difficult this may seem, in the end, all conflicts end in negotiated settlements. It was disappointing that Liz Truss, when Foreign Secretary, dissuaded President Zelensky from continuing with the peace treaty with Russia. It might have been possible then. And you know, just this very week, Boris Johnson has said the same thing. All out war, no treaty. But negotiations, it seems to me, are all the more urgent now there is a threat of nuclear weapons being used. We can raise our voices and endorse the Protect People and the Planet appeal for a nuclear weapon-free world, which affirms that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Recently, 30 Democrats in the USA committed themselves to diplomacy and not arming for war. But the next day, they renounced their letter with pressure from the right wing of the party. However, this was not before Dennis Kushner, formerly congressman and formerly presidential candidate, had quoted John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, where Kennedy said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear. Let us never fear to negotiate." It was this thinking which produced negotiations between the USA and the Soviet Union, which averted a nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis in, I'm sure many remember it, October '62, just 60 years ago. I think that pouring weapons into Ukraine, as the USA and UK are doing, is not going to achieve peace. As Richard Falk, professor of international law at Princeton University in the States, said recently, this is a geopolitical war which is being waged in a manner oblivious to the wider human interests at stake, and in a profound sense, contrary to the well-being and fate of Ukraine and its people. We must support all those both in the Ukraine and in Russia, who are bravely standing out and refusing to take up arms. We know, although news is suppressed by President Putin, that there are many in Russia not wanting to fight, as witnessed by all the Russians fleeing over the borders to avoid conscription. On the question of nuclear weapons, it is clear that the majority world wants the abolition of nuclear weapons. Now there is in place, as you know, the United Nations negotiated treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the TPNW. It has at present been signed by 91 nation states and ratified by 68. Alas, the UK has refused to join in the negotiations. One problem being, again, that NATO, dominated by the USA administration, put pressure on NATO states not to participate. Even more depressing at the present time is that the main opposition party in the UK here, Labour, under Keir Starmer's leadership, has continued to support the UK's nuclear weapons, the US Trident nuclear-armed submarines based at Faslane in Scotland. As Kate Hudson, General Secretary of CND, said, Labour should be a voice for peace, de-escalation and disarmament. A Labour government could be a world leader in nuclear disarmament and give further momentum to the growing number of nations that have signed up to the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is in step with the 86% of Labour voters who support a global ban on nuclear weapons. While the Ukraine-Russia conflict dominates the mainstream media, we must not forget other wars which are being waged. Here I think of Yemen, where the UK, in a coalition with Saudi Arabia, is engaged in a bitter conflict. Of course, both warring sides there, the Houthis and the Saudis, are conducting airstrikes, but it is only the Saudis which are doing it with aircraft and bombs bought from the UK and made in the northwest of England. To me, this is disgraceful and breaks all the rules we are supposed to have in place not to sell arms to nations which would be used to target civilian infrastructure or residential areas. When asked about this, Liz Truss, then Foreign Secretary, claimed it was only isolated incidents. There's a humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen, which is not often in our press, with people without shelter, food, and where cholera is raging. Or look at the Middle East, where Israeli aggression against the Palestinians has increased during the last month, probably prior to their elections, to show who could be nastiest against the Palestinians, as far as I can make out. Looks like Netanyahu has got back in. One Palestinian commentator said recently, very few are talking about peace, whether here or in Ukraine or elsewhere. Why? Because there is money to be made from conflict. While global stock markets are slumping, Israeli and US arms manufacturers are making handsome profits. Would that the old adage, people before profits, did not ring, profits before people did not ring true. When we are looking towards working for stability and peace in the world, I think we really must think hard about NATO, which is a military alliance. NATO holds the policy of not only holding nuclear weapons, Trident is integrated into NATO, but a policy of first strike. Think of that, with Trident having enough killing power to annihilate the world. NATO's not only expanded in Europe, but across the world, with agreements all around the Asian Pacific region. And recently, it infiltrated Latin America with an agreement with Colombia. This latter is a direct infringement of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which established the first nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America. As I said earlier, NATO blocked member states from entering the negotiations for the TPNW. It's always been dominated by the US administration. NATO established 6 nuclear-armed bases across Europe with its policy of what they sound so friendly, doesn't it? Nuclear sharing. Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and as far as Turkey and the UK. Thus, non-nuclear states, such as Belgium, became by default nuclear, with their pilots having to be trained to use nuclear-capable aircraft. In 2008, nuclear weapons were taken away from the UK. But now, in this very dangerous world we've got, they are being brought back to the base at Lakenheath in Suffolk. This is unacceptable, that we should again have land-based nuclear weapons. CND and the Stop the War Coalition will be holding a protest, you've mentioned it tonight, at the base on September 19th, November. So do try to join or support. You could perhaps support somebody to go financially, because it's quite difficult, long way to go. Well, it is for us in the north. Whatever you can do to help and to raise it in the press, because it never is. It is disturbing too that so many in our present government and in opposition parties want to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP, especially at a time when here in the UK, people are suffering from the cost of living crisis, not to mention the millions living in poor countries who live without adequate food, shelter, and clean water. Weapons do not feed people. Weapons do not educate children. Weapons do not provide clean water. Moreover, the military manufacturers are increasing our problems with global warming. Imagine the production of more and more weapons, planes, and bombs increases carbon emissions massively. What can we do? We can support groups who support our aims as collectively, and I know that you do. We Are Stronger campaign, CND, campaign against the arms trade, particularly are focusing this very week on Yemen to help support the people of Yemen. They've just put out some new things you'll find on the web, and the Stop the War Coalition too. We can lobby our councillors and MPs to sign the pledge to support the TPNW, which I believe Faringdon Council has. We can support peace education, as so many of our young people do not know about the suffering and death caused at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or the facts about current nuclear missiles. I recently went to talk at a sixth form college in another town near here, in Huddersfield, and one teacher has, in his enrichment course for the A-levels, had actually put on this course about our futures. And he wanted to know about campaigning and what sort of things I'd done as campaigning and what was effective as campaigning. But I had to be very careful because it hadn't to appear political, as if. But anyway, well, I said, you know, non-violent direction can be very, very effective. And I told them about Greenham. But I said, you know, equally, you could use non-violent direct action against somebody proposing some planning application that you didn't like. So I sort of didn't make it too, you know, sort of anti-nuclear. And they were fascinated because, of course, they were all 17-year-olds, and there was quite a lot of teachers there as well. But they didn't know about so many of these things, you know, that I, you know, from my past, sort of like 40 years ago. And I showed them that Greenham, in fact, was effective because Gorbachev always said, it's recorded, that it led him to make the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, which, of course, Trump later tore up. We can write to the press and the media. And of course, today, we can use social media to speak truth to power. It's such a good weapon, but I'm afraid it is also a weapon on the other side because you get such appalling things coming out. I would like to end where I began, on the war between Russia and Ukraine, with a statement released recently by faith groups in the USA, but could equally apply in the UK. They said, as people of faith and conscience, believing in the sanctity of all life on this planet, we urge our government to take a leadership role in bringing the conflict in Ukraine to an end through a negotiated settlement before the conflict results in nuclear war that would devastate the world's ecosystems and annihilate humankind, as well as many other living creatures. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Rae. That was very thoughtful and gives us plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to change the view now to gallery, and by all means, take yourselves off mute if you want to. And it's now open house for questions. Either raise your hand through the button at the bottom, or just raise your hand physically, and then I'll see whether you have a question or not. There's a few of you not on video: Steve, Susan, Marge, Helen, Holly. So I can't see your hands raised. If you are trying to raise your hand. Rae, can I perhaps just confirm? You mentioned that Faringdon Town Council has signed
yes, I thought you had.
the TPNW, and that is in fact correct. So,
good.
And interestingly, it was pretty much, well, not entirely unanimous, but there was certainly a very, very a significant majority of town councillors, interestingly, yes, that were happy to go along with this. We don't yet know how we can actually translate it into action on the ground in Faringdon Marketplace, because we don't obviously have convoys going through Faringdon Marketplace. It all goes along the bypass. But nonetheless, it's certainly something that we feel quietly pleased about. That we have this as a discussion.
I want to congratulate you, because my council wouldn't, even though they're a Labour council. I must say there is sort of right-wing Labour council, unfortunately, we've got, if you can make sense of that. But we try to raise these issues, and unfortunately we've got two very vocal councillors who, one in particular, who has relatives all who work at Barrow. And every time we raise my friends and myself in the Labour Party, we raise questions about nuclear weapons. She weighs in with that would mean jobs, and we say no, we support defence diversification, but she won't have it. And they always override everybody, because they're both of them quite prominent in the council and young, so people think, oh, young people. And it is a problem with the unions, because as you saw, they unfortunately passed a resolution against defence diversification at the TUC Congress, and that was so depressing. So depressing. Because surely, you know, if you want to move from weapons, that's what you want. Defence diversification. We did it after the last war. We could do it now. We can produce, we can, you know, support, government could support industries which make, infrastructure for sustainable energy. They could be skilled jobs, but it's a difficult one. Of course, some of the big unions do support us, but anyway, congratulations to you.
Thank you, thank you. Phil.
The doomsday clock is set at 100 seconds to midnight, and I feel very depressed at the state of the world. And I wonder what Ray's got in way to encourage me to be a bit more positive.
Even optimistic?
Optimistic even. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Okay. I think in my bad moments, I also feel depressed at the world, but I keep going. What green shoots are there? There are some. I mean, clearly in all that number of nations that have signed up for the TPNW, you know, that the majority world definitely wants a banning of nuclear weapons. But the trouble is, the nuclear armed states are so strong, aren't they?
Yeah.
But there is that. And there's also signs politically which give you cause for hope. Phil, you know, in Latin America, where we've seen recently new rise in socialism. I mean, it's a struggle, but if they can do it, I keep thinking we should be able to do it, but I'm not sure. But anyway, that does give me cause for optimism, what's happening in Latin America.
Well, Bolsonaro is out, isn't he?
Yes, but other states too, Bolivia and so on, yeah, have really swung over. Because the USA, I'm sorry to say, the CIA will certainly do everything to, you know, undermine it as they did in Chile. But let's hope that the people win out, you know. I'm sure that they're trying to, and the USA putting sanctions on everybody is another depressing side of life. But there you go. Those are things that give me cause for hope. And the other thing that always gives me cause for hope is a very local thing. And that's we have such a small but strong, like you do, local group, both in the little town where I live and also in Greater Manchester. We really do achieve things, you know. They're probably minor on a national scale, but and we also get the support, as you will know, of the Manchester City Local Authority, who are the Secretariat for the Mayors for Peace, another group which gives you cause for hope. And recently in the city of Manchester, we got a peace garden reinstated. We got events on Hiroshima Day supported by the council and locally. So those also give me cause for hope, because, you know, not everyone is a right-wing fascist out there wanting to bomb everybody with his.
Carol, I can see your hand raised. Take yourself off mute.
Yes, thank you very much, Sherda, and thank you very much, Ray, as well, for your talk. I hope that what I'm going to say now isn't going to depress Phil again after you've just tried to raise his hopes. There's a very good article in today's Morning Star by Andrew Murray. It's particularly about Paul Mason, but there's one paragraph in there which resonates with what you've been saying tonight about the spending on arms, and that is the government's commitment to raise the arms bill by 3% of GDP. And I don't think people really have quite grasped just how much money that is. The Royal United Services Institute have calculated that the government will have to increase the military budget by 60% in real terms to meet the target. And that means, according to Andrew Murray, income tax would have to go up by 5 pence in the pound, or the VAT rate from 20% to 25%. So to achieve that, there would have to be really big cuts to public services and even more austerity than we're probably going to face when we get this statement in a couple of weeks' time. But I think the way to look at this is not in a pessimistic way, but to think to ourselves, well, okay, so that they might be trying to do this, but are the people going to tolerate it when they see what cuts are going to come? I mean, there's already a big tide of fight back by the trade unions. And I think if we can get communities as well, and I think the two things go together, you have to have the organised labour fighting back for their terms and conditions and better wages and what have you. But you also need the communities to be fighting back as well against the austerity that's going to come, like we did the first time round when they tried to shut our libraries down or the children's centres. We weren't very successful in Oxfordshire about the children's centres, but we did manage to save the libraries. And I think the fight back has got to be right across this country when we see what is in store for us. And so when they talk about increasing the armaments bill, and you know, it's like the CND used to say, isn't it, that we'll know that the world is changing when the defence, the armaments manufacturers have to have jumble sales.
Yes.
And
oh yes, there was a lovely cartoon.
and we get all the money we need. So I think there are grounds for optimism, but it does require people to understand what's happening and to join the fight back, and not just, you know, bewail and breastbeat. We have to take action. Now's the time to do it. We're in the fight of our lives. Thank you very much.
Ray, do you want to respond, or should we go on?
I'll just make a very quick comment, because I totally agree. What I thought was interesting, that so many of you in Faringdon read the Morning Star, which I do, as you know, and because it certainly does bring out the facts there, which you don't get, even in the Guardian. Quite a lot of the times you don't get them. And there was another letter, Carol, from Andrew Northall, the day I had my letter in about capitalism makes a killing. And he, when you were talking about the increase in defence, he actually gave in his letter the actual cost of this 3%, and it's unbelievable. It's 157 billion in additional spending over the next 8 years for this 3% increase. So, another thing I suppose we can do is encourage more people to read and support the Morning Star, because of course it struggles. They won't even take it in the House of Commons, you know, and they never, ever, I've written it time and time again to the BBC, and they never, ever quote it, use it, interview the editor, whatever. In fact, they sunk to an all-time low, I thought, this week in the news programmes when they interviewed Nigel Farage about immigration. All-time low. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Tristan, your hand is raised. Are you sitting on your stairs, by the way?
Yes, yeah. There's an Extinction Rebellion meeting going on in the other room, so I had to pop out here, basically. Well, what to say? Really heartening to see your crew together, basically discussing this stuff, and thank you to Ray. My questions, I guess, are really to Helen and Joy. They're both Swindon sort of CND supporters. I'm from Swindon myself. Have we ever tried to raise this with our council? I know that well, we've got a Tory controlled and right-leaning council, so a motion there would be wonderful. And the other thing I wanted to mention was with regards to opportunities to actually explain how much of our money is actually spent on military spending. We've got a protest in Swindon on Saturday, the People's Assembly thing. It's looking like it's going to be a bit of a whopper, and it would be wonderful to have some people that actually understand the ins and outs of military spending come down and support us. So yeah, just wondering, have we ever tried to raise anything like this? I know we've got a couple of councillors that might support it, and well, does anyone want to come down on Saturday?
Which bag?
Helen, go ahead.
I've never tried to raise it, but we did have a bit of a discussion about it some time ago, and thought it might be worthwhile trying to do it in Highworth first, as they have a large number of independents on the town council, and then see how that goes. But the Swindon representatives from Highworth are all Tories still, so whether we'll get any further than that, I don't know. There's we're not. Yeah, I can see a few people might support it in the Swindon Council, but as a grouping, they're quite heavy on the let's say traditional side, for want of a better word.
Oh yeah, I mean, Jane might be worth it, and we've also got a load of new Labour candidates standing at the moment that we might be able to prod. Councillors looking to become MPs, desperate to impress, so you never know. Okie doke. Yeah, 1 p.m. behind the town hall, People's Assembly marches. Yeah, hope to see you.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you.
Read that one, Jenny.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Ray, you mentioned Netanyahu in your talk. And we did notice today on the news that in all the discussions on Radio 4, the Palestinians weren't mentioned once, interestingly, which is awful, really, that that it's come to this.
Yes, I am sorry about the BBC News. It just beggars belief. I mean, that they would. I think on that immigrant question, when I was listening during the day, which I can't because I'm retired now, there's all the people they interviewed were either Tories on the side of like sending the refugees to Rwanda, or Nigel Farage, who said we were being invaded. That was on that issue. But as you say, Israel, they're particularly weak. And yet, I want to support the BBC because I don't know about you, but it has such wonderful feature programs. They're really very good. I mean, last weekend, they had two of my friends on. They had a wonderful play, I don't know, by a working class, based on a novel by a working class author in this Sunday afternoon slot. This is BBC Radio. And it had an actor from here, Alex Matty, in it. And it's a wonderful play, it was really sort of working class play. And then they had Maxine Peake, who's a great friend of ours, as you all know, in the evening reading about the floods in the valleys from a future point of view, Wexford. And then they've had Maxine Peake again, with the Simon Armitage translation of the medieval poem, The Owl and the Pussycat. Maxine was the owl in a debate, which was again very good. And I'm thinking, what a rich programme I get that way, which will prevent working class views or, and on the other hand, the news, to me, it's just dire bias. And yet, the Tories say it's biased towards the left. It's ridiculous.
Thanks, Tristan, for putting that into the chat. Jenny, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a small point to start with. I do agree with Ray about the BBC. I'm always in two minds about the BBC. Like Ray, I enjoy so many of the different programmes that are so informative or so good from the drama point of view. Even the Archers, you know, we listen to every night, and actually through the Archers, some very interesting issues that are important to everybody are raised. So that's a good one. But as for the news, well, from my point of view, it's so one-sided, it beggars belief. Coming on to a slightly different point, regarding military spending, I'd like to put in a word for the organisation Scientists for Global Responsibility, because they publish some excellent, very academic, very readable and factually correct stuff about the military sector, principally from the point of view of the environment, but the environment and nuclear weapons, of course, are all mixed up anyway. We shouldn't try and differentiate them too much. So Scientists for Global Responsibility, if you want really what they call responsible science regarding the military and the impact, the carbon imprint of the military, which I can't get over the fact that the carbon emissions as a result of military operations are not included in the United Nations, what do you call it, calculations on carbon emissions. It is appalling, and not many people know that. So that's something we can keep on about to make sure that gradually the information gets through. And as regards the situation that Phil referred to about the getting depressed about everything, I'd like to. I've got a thought, which is, I don't know how much justification I've got for saying this, but I like to think, it comforts me to think it's worse here than in many other European countries as regarding the information that we get or don't get, and that other countries are doing a bit better in holding on to the important things of life, like decent salaries and holidays and education and all those sorts of things that and their health services are perhaps a bit better than ours. So perhaps I like to convince myself that it's, as I say, worse here than perhaps in other areas. And I've got no facts or figures to base that on. It's just a thought that perhaps we've just got to try a bit harder to keep hold of what we've got and improve on the situation.
I liked Ray's comment when she said that she was very pleased with what was happening in her own local community, and that gives her hope. And it's possibly worth remembering that here with the Ukrainian situation, there are about 80 Ukrainians that are either in Faringdon or very close to Faringdon with hosts. And that's something that makes you feel hopeful, if you like. That there is a social conscience in the community that steps up and delivers. How are we doing? Yeah, Janie.
Well, just to go back to the BBC, are people aware that the BBC intends to more or less run down BBC Radio 4, which is only listened to by old people, and change to a digitized service? And they're also closing down or greatly reducing a lot of local radio stations.
I wasn't aware of Radio 4. I was aware of the local radio going
Came up
digital.
in the feedback program.
Right.
Oh.
No, that's news to me. I just thought it was the local radio stations that were going.
No,
Oh
wait
my
for
goodness.
it. Wait for it.
Oh my goodness. It's the best
And
bit.
the World Service, of course.
We're back to
Yes,
being
that's
depressed
the one
again.
they've got. Yeah. Mm. Oh, that is.
John, go ahead.
Could I just make a comment? And I'm afraid it's very optimistic, but what has been concerning me very much is the Russian attacks on the electrical systems and how close that comes to the nuclear power stations.
Yes, it's,
And the very large nuclear power stations, whose name I can't possibly remember or pronounce, is one of the most danger and the most threat.
Zaporizhia, John.
Probably.
Yeah.
yes, that is frightening. But also frightening, do you not find, our government's drive to have new nuclear energy, which I'm totally opposed to.
Yeah.
I do speak on that because we don't need it. It's just short-term profits for the industry, and it's not. Both the Tories, Johnson gave the go-ahead for Sizewell, and it's vastly expensive. It produces the nuclear waste, which we don't know what to do with. There's so many contras against nuclear energy. We can do it now with sustainable energy, but they just don't seem to want to do that. I mean, the two academics from Sussex University say it's because they need the skills to connect for nuclear energy for nuclear weapons. They say they're directly linked, which is even more, as you would say, depressing, isn't it? And they just keep. I actually wrote to Ed Miliband about this, since he's the shadow for energy, and I made all the points against it, especially two about depleted uranium. Uranium we have to mine from mainly indigenous lands, which causes them suffering, blah, 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 blah. And he never replied. He didn't send a single message. And he just went on speaking about we need this energy mix. I cannot understand how an intelligent man cannot take in all the arguments against nuclear power.
Bruce, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, and in answer to many of the comments, I'm going to be the devil's advocate again. So I quite agree. Oil is bad, nuclear is bad, but then would have to accept many deaths of cold. And if we accept that, it goes to my hobby horse, which there are too many people on the planet. But politically, you can't let people die. But to save the planet, unless the population is seriously depleted by the end of the century. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We lost you briefly.
Okay. Well, I'm saying that the planet has got too many people on it. I agree with oil. I agree with nuclear. But the alternative, wind power and solar power, isn't as clean as people think. There are also problems with creating those things. There's going to be a huge amount of waste material coming when those turbines come down. On the BBC, the only thing that I think is worth listening to or watching now is Melvin Bragg's In Our Time. On the weapons, Eisenhower said, beware the beware the industrial military complex. And I believe that the USA is totally controlled by the military complex these days, whether it's the Democrats or they bow down to the military complex.
Harrison,
Before my time, but I don't think Britain should have declared war either in the First World War or the Second World War. I'm in favor of unilateral disarmament and making the country neutral. But we would have to accept that we could have ended up with the Kaiser or Hitler or maybe Stalin or Mao, and these days maybe Putin or Xi. And the UK, England, and then Britain has always been an aggressive power. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Bruce, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Tristan, you had your hand up, so go ahead.
Oh gosh. I just wanted to, well, so to, I guess, so to reassure actually that population isn't really the issue with regards to carbon emissions and these sorts of things. So it's the top 1% that produce the vast majority of emissions. And forgive me, I can't remember the percentage, but it's absolutely vast by comparison to what's produced by the lower percentage. And we are actually beginning to see a leveling off of the population now. So population growth is beginning to tail off. The most important thing that we can do is reduce the emissions of the wealthiest in our society. That's where we need to focus. With regards to nuclear being cleaner than, well, renewables, it simply isn't the case. Yeah, we can put in solar and wind power more quickly and more effectively than we can nuclear. So nuclear, to expand our nuclear grid would take a minimum of 8 years. You know, you look at how late Hinkley Point is at the moment, that is already, you know, nearly a decade overrunning. And yeah, just, well, have another check, look into green energy, and yeah, you'll see it is the sanest solution. I do apologize, I just rambled then. Yeah.
Thanks. Bruce, you can come back in a minute, but we've got Sue and then we've got Helen. Sue, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to know why people would use the argument that nuclear energy is green, because the amount of concrete and materials used to build the nuclear power stations and the amount of energy needed to get rid of the waste afterwards, it doesn't seem very green to me, because the emissions can last for tens of thousands of years. So how they calculate it as being green energy, I don't really understand. So can anyone answer that?
Thank you, Sue. Helen, I'll let you ask your question.
I was just going to say, in reply to Bruce's comment, that insulation is an extremely cheap and effective way of saving lives. We have the worst housing in Europe. Over 40% of our housing is pre-1919 single skin properties, and they are not designed to be effectively, you know, to retain heat as is necessary these days. And I mean, it's the poorest people who lose out, because they can't afford to do these changes themselves. The better off, you know, they're the ones who are getting the solar panels. They're the ones who are, you know, insulating their properties. It's you know, again, it's the poorest people in society who are paying the highest price. And we've always had huge numbers of deaths from cold over the winter. We're looking at about, I think it was 7,000 last winter, but we're also looking increasingly now, because of lack of insulation, of deaths through heat, of excess deaths through heat. So insulation solves both problems. And of course, you know, you can expand the workforce. It provides a huge number of jobs for people. And it can be done effectively in communities and very cheaply.
Thank you. We've got quite a few. Oh, this is people saying, well said, Helen. That's I thought hands were being raised, but it was Rae, do you want to come back on any of these points?
No, I haven't changed my view on nuclear power one jot. Because I'm totally opposed to it. It's expensive. It does produce the waste. We don't know what to do with. We don't even know what to do with the waste we've got now, let alone. And these SMRs, which have been, that sound so cozy, they call them baby, small modular reactors. They produce masses of waste. It's not that they don't produce waste because they're small, they do. And also, I particularly feel for the uranium miners. You listen to the Navajo in the south of the United States or in Australia, the local people, the indigenous people where uranium is mined. It's they who've suffered for us having nuclear power. They've died and they've just been cast on one side. Nobody cares about them. It's appalling. So there are many more arguments, but the cost is one, the length of time to bring them on, as something as Tristan said. So I've not changed my view on that whatsoever. And I also think it is linked to nuclear weapons, as the academics, you can read about what the academics say from Sussex, the two of them. Read CND's website, because there's very good articles there by Ian Fairley, who's my buddy in this. Oh, he's the scientist, I'm not, I'm just a campaigner, a humble campaigner.
Okay. Thank you. Sue, just to answer your question as to why nuclear is often put into the green pile, or at least the carbon neutral pile, if you can avoid burning fossil fuels, then you are going to reduce that carbon footprint enormously. But there's been a number of very good points made that clearly, the building of the nuclear power station has a carbon footprint. Obviously, you've got the issues of nuclear waste and so on. But if the priority is to reduce burning fossil fuels, then clearly nuclear, and we have to also mention fusion here, could potentially be part of the solution. Bruce, you wanted to come back to us on this.
Tristan's gone now, but I have done a fair amount of investigation into solar and turbine power. I worked with engineers. I actually was part of the construction team to build a 300 hectare power plant, massive plant, and they're not quite as cheap as you think. And there are lots of things involved. And the actual solar power panels don't last. They last about 10 years, and after that, the technology advances. They still work, and you've still got to keep them clean, like you see with the Mars rovers and those things. I agree with basically everything. I agree with that, with the war side and the climate change. My thing about the population is less about carbon output and more about the discipline all the way around the world, particularly like in Brazil, in Africa, and in Indonesia. That's making a huge change. I've no doubt that the Earth could accommodate 1 trillion people with the new technology that's coming along, but you wouldn't expect any other flora or fauna to be growing on the planet at the same time. That's my piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Have we got any final questions? We've got Jenny. You've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I would like to ask Rae if she could say something about these so-called small nuclear weapons, or battlefield nuclear weapons, I think they're calling them, which I don't think is the answer at all, but I think we need to know the arguments against their potential use. Rae, if you could say something about them.
I don't know a lot of the technical detail, Jenny, but what I do think is a nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. And it's going to, however small it is, it's just going to be just as dangerous, because it's going to explode and send the radiation round. And look at what happened to Hiroshima. The ones we've got, the large ones, you know, are 15 times as big as that. So I don't think this idea that there's a small one that could be used, I think it's absurd to imagine that it won't cause enormous devastation.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
It's like they want to always call things small, or as though that makes them look more safe or benign or something. It's the same with the reactors, you know, calling the SMRs, the small modular reactors. I read somebody in there who called them baby reactors, and I thought, oh God, small and cuddly. You know, it's ridiculous. And I just think that I don't actually know the technical detail, Jenny, but to me, it just does not make sense.
Rae, you're absolutely spot on that it makes no sense at all to call these small. So if you consider a conventional explosion of, let's say, a ton of conventional explosive, that sounds an awful lot. You know, a ton is kind of a carload or whatever, and it does enormous devastation. Hiroshima was 12,000 tons equivalent, and these so-called tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons are 1,000 tons. They're a kiloton. So yes, they're relatively small compared to Hiroshima, but they are still absolutely enormous compared to anything that we've seen in terms of conventional. So these are absolutely enormous, these so-called tactical nuclear weapons, and thank God none of them have yet been used, but it is really scary that people genuinely seem to be talking about them as if it's realistic to use them. That's the really scary bit. Sorry, Bruce, I think you had your hand up again. Or
yeah, I was just going to say that to Rae that I agree with the things, and I think I've said it at a peace group meeting before. What can we do? The protests are fine, but the protests get up people's nose and sometimes have more of a negative effect than a positive effect in getting our thoughts across. CND has been going, I don't know, 50 years, but the government basically ignores it. We've got more, I think, United States troops in this country than ever, if not troops, military hardware.
Bases.
Leadership in this country, in my lifetime, the parliaments have really been pathetic, but not just here, around the world. Democracy is lovely, but it's not very efficient. You know, what can we do to make a difference?
Rae, I think that question was directed at you.
Yeah, I think it was. Directed, yeah.
As Speaker, you have the responsibility of coming up with the answers.
Yeah, I did give in my talk the things I thought we should be doing, didn't I? I gave a list of those. So, and I think we just have to keep on speaking out, and, you know, as I said, speaking truth to power. And education seems to me is really important for young people to know exactly what we're talking about. You can eventually achieve some things. I did give the example of Greenham, where we did achieve something positive. I agree with Bruce. It does seem a desperate world at the moment, but I won't, yeah, democracy. Yeah. Was it Mark Twain who said we've got the best government that money can buy? But I think we've just got Noam Chomsky always says that in the end, it will be people power that win. I'm not quite as convinced as, but I think we've just got to keep on keeping on.
I'm going to ask you another question, also a little bit Bruce-like, but you expressed disappointment at the Labour Party at the moment under Keir Starmer, that they're actually pro-Trident. How can we possibly help the Labour Party kind of get its mojo back, get its courage back, to stick its head above the parapet and say what it really thinks? Because I can't believe that people with a moral conscience can actually agree with Trident.
Yes, I think that is one of the things you were talking about, depression. We were, weren't we? Filled it. That is one of the things that has depressed me in this last year. Keir Starmer squashing. He's not only, he's actually evicted people from the Labour Party who had views such as mine. One of my friends, Carol Wilcox, has been, but we have a problem, of course, because many of my friends support the Green Party, as I suspect many of you do. But with our current system, that it's not going to get anywhere, is it? I mean, I'd like Caroline Lucas cloned, but so unless we can manage, there is now quite a strong movement of PR, and even some Labour Party people are feeling that. So unless we can get to that, I don't see how we, we can change some of the policies. But how we change the Labour Party, it's very difficult because, for example, some of my friends feel Keir Starmer's gone so far away from their views that they've left. But that, unfortunately, to me, leaves him in a stronger position.
Yeah.
Because he's left with people who support his views. And so it is, I know one of my friends, nearly every week she says, I can't stand this any longer. I've got to leave. No, I'm not going to leave, because if they got rid of me, then they'll be pleased to get rid of me. And Tony Benn said that. I'm not leaving the Labour Party. The Labour Party's left me. So whether we can get enough support on the left, I don't know at the moment. And yet, again, you've got another dilemma, haven't you? Because I'm sure most of the people I'm talking to today want rid of the Tories. So we'd want at the next general election for the Tories to be out. With our two-party system, that would leave, if he can get enough support, and he's getting a higher rating at the moment, would leave us with a Keir Starmer style Labour Party in government. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. I wish I did know the answer to what we do about the Labour Party.
Well, have we got any other questions for anyone? Jenny?
Not a question, but a comment. When we're all getting depressed about how difficult it is to persuade people that, to come over to our point of view, I suppose. If you think back through history, even recent history, where would we have been without, say, the Green Women and all the other people who've campaigned, and the demonstrations and the meetings and all the rest of it? If all of that was swept aside, wouldn't we be in a worse place? So we need to keep on going, really. Sorry?
Keep on keeping on, as they say.
That's right. Keep on going. At least we're still here and we're still alive and we're still campaigning. So
Well, on that point, shall we call the meeting to a close and thank Rae very warmly for what I think was a very thoughtful and very inspirational speech. Thank you, Rae.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I like your group.
Well, thanks again, everyone. And I'll end the meeting. I'll end the recording and it'll be made available on the website.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Bye.